Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement, getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on us authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
Hi, everyone. My name is John Herold, and I am the author of this book, The One-Legged Cowboy. Most people get lost between the pages of history, and no one remembers them two generations later. So I've decided to write this book, or this novel, based on my grandfather's experiences as a cowboy. I knew very little about him, so I incorporated what I did know into a fictional character, which is in this book, The One-Legged Cowboy. Joe Lundy is the fictional cowboy in this story. He faces two big dilemmas in his lifetime. Question one. What would you out there in the audience, what would you do if you fell down a ravine and broke your leg and you were miles away from home and there was nobody nearby? Well, in our day and age, you probably would use a cell phone to get help and call 911. That's if the cell phone wasn't broke in the fall. Well, Joe Lundy, back in the 1880s, he fell down a ravine and broke his leg and hurt his right hand. He shot his horse and faced a 10-mile walk across a hot, sandy wasteland to reach his home, the ranch, the Delta D Ranch. When he reached there, only with the help of an Indian boy who rescued him and a prospector and a donkey that he had, it was determined by the rancher's wife, Anna, that he needed desperately to have his leg removed, amputated, because it was full of gangrene. So she had experiences in the Civil War at doing such a thing, so she went ahead and did it. And she happened to have a bottle of ether, which wasn't used in the Civil War, but she knew how to use it, so she used it to put Joe to sleep, and then she proceeded to cut the leg off, sew the skin around the bottom of the leg, that was the stump that was left, and covered the whole thing in sawdust. He was in that condition and was a touch and go as to whether he would live, but he did. And so his first dilemma was getting over that and getting back on his feet. Well, Annie, the who did the operation, she contacted a Englishman out there in the shop to make a artificial leg for Joe. Joe eventually got the leg, and he proceeded to learn how to walk with it, but his right hand was still kind of crippled. So for the next months, Joe spent his time at the ranch trying to do little things around the ranch while he regained his composure and his abilities. But there was one thing that hurt him badly. He was a 35-year-old cowboy. And in those days, cowboys were new, most of them from the East Coast, and they were anywhere from 18 to 25. Joe being a 35-year-old cowboy was considered an old timer. And now with his right leg amputated, it limited his ability to what he could do. So he proceeded over the next few months of continuing to work at the ranch, helping as much as he could. And he had to put up with that leg and his looking for work. And that meant that was his second dilemma. What was he going to do with the rest of his life? Well, the young Indian boy stayed with him throughout the entire time. And together they were able to improve upon things and help Joe, I keep saying John, help Joe use his left hand to learn how to shoot a pistol. Finally, Joe, with a lot of practice, was able to do it. And one time they went to the town, Bitter Wells, nearby, for a shooting match. And lo and behold, Joe was able to win the match, and the sheriff was able to decide that he was worth something, so he made him a deputy. And this man now had a job. He liked what he was doing, and he proceeded to work at the job diligently. And then in one occasion, two rustlers had rustled several cows and butchered them and sold the meat to a woman in the town. And then they took off. So Joe had to, as a deputy, he had to follow them and bring them back. Well, make a long story short, he went from one town to another, and eventually caught them in a town. And with the sheriff's help, they were able to corner the two cowboys, rustlers, and they had a shootout, and one got killed and the other one was taken into custody, and they were brought back to Bitter Wells for prosecution. There's several things in there that are added to help clarify what it was like to live in the West as a cowboy. The food was usually very simple, and a cowboy spent 24 hours a day out on the range in the same clothes, eating the same food that the chuck wagon would serve, sleeping under the stars, and facing longhorn cattle, which can be very spooky. If they hear something, they'll start a stampede. And they had to face lightning, a lot of heavy lightning, sometimes snow. And of course, the stampedes were a common possibility. But it took months to move the cattle, which was thousands of cattle or cows, and get them to Kansas City, where they'd be loaded on rail cars and sent back east to feed the population. Anyway, Joe returned back to his home, Bitter Wells, and he met a woman who was moving across the country with her daughter. The daughter had a great singing voice, and the mother was taking her to San Francisco to become a opera singer. Well, the mother and Joe fell in love, but the mother was insistent that she had to take her daughter to San Francisco, so they broke up. Well, nobody knows for sure what happened, but 9 months later, in the San Francisco newspaper was a small column, and it said in there that this woman had given birth to a boy, and she named him Joe. So hopefully Joe would read the article and possibly go out to California and reunite with her and the daughter. But that has to be, if it does happen, it'd have to be in the next issue of One-Legged Cowboy. So, as far as my background, I met my grandfather on a couple occasions. One in particular, I was about 6 years old, and he was living a few miles from me in Pennsylvania. He had married a woman in Kansas and had moved to Philadelphia and worked for Atlantic Richfield Gas Company. And so I got a chance to see him. He reminded me a little bit of Gary Cooper in the way he looked. But he wasn't super tall like Gary, so it was a little different there. But he just had old jeans on and a white T-shirt. And he was talking to my mother most of the time. So I really didn't get a whole lot of information from him, but I was impressed. He walked bow-legged like somebody that has ridden a horse for a long time. But the thing was, he was having a barbecue, and his barbecue was nothing more than a big flat pan full of homemade baked beans and hot dogs stuck in there with the beans. Well, I'm like beans, and the smell was just tremendous. So I had to wait. I wasn't allowed to touch it till he was ready to say so. So I drifted off and went down to his garden, and I was impressed by how nice his garden was, and it led into my aunt who lived next door. And I sat down in her garden, and I pulled off a big ripe red juicy beefsteak tomato. And I sat there and I ate it, enjoyed it, and then I heard my name called, so I came back and I had the beans and a hot dog. And shortly after that, my mother and I left. I put on hold any of my ideas on writing a book until I had a chance to go to California. I was invited to California to aerospace, to work in aerospace in Silicon Valley. And then I had time sometimes to think about what I wanted to do later in life. And writing a book about my grandfather was one of my goals. I would stand next to the wire fence watching at this one place, watching Bradleys. They're kind of like a tank that would roll around a quarter-mile track. And what happened, a big wind came up and blew a lot of the tumbleweed into my back. And most people wouldn't think too much about it, but I did, because it reminded me again of my love of the West and my grandfather. And then I learned that you could take tumbleweed and get the young shoots, and you cut them up, and you make spaghetti, and you get a squirrel or a rabbit, and you put it together with a vegetable, and you have yourself a cowboy stew. So that kind of interested me. I never had it, but I thought I'd like to try it. Anyway, I was out there, and if I go to the beach, I sit down and watch the waves, and I start thinking about what I wanted to do with my free time. And that's when this book about the one-legged cowboy came back into my thinking. I had a lot of ideas, but this was the one that I wanted to do first. So what you see is my effort to put together a book that would give an idea to anyone who wants to read it, just how difficult it was to be a cowboy out west. They moved about 27 million cattle across months of travel to get the cattle to Kansas. And a little note here: if a cow got a little cold, the cow could lose up to 40 pounds of weight. So it was imperative to keep the cattle moving, but at a slow pace. That's why it took a little longer than most people would realize. But they made it, and they made a lot of it. At 27 million cows, there's an awful lot of cows and a lot of cowboys to do it. My grandfather, I just might add, he was a cowboy in Wyoming, and he helped out in the last cattle drive that came up to Montana. He was part of that. So it was an exciting time, and it was one that will always be in the history books, but not necessarily with Joe Lundy's name. So I wanted to make sure that Joe Lundy represented the average cowboy who had problems in the West, trying to get over an injury and also at the same time trying to make a living. I hope you enjoy reading it. If there's any questions, please you can ask me now, since we have a little bit of time left. Well, no questions? Well, I could tell you that I have 4 other books that I'm writing or have written, and they'll be out this month probably, because I've been saving them for the big time. They came after this one, and my latest one is called Cottage Mystery, which is a true mystery that I've written about a cottage that was vacant in the Jersey Pines in New Jersey. I think you'll find it interesting. So if you get a chance, check them out. They're under my website, johnheroldbooks.com. I want to thank you again for everything. It's been a pleasure, and good luck in the future to everybody. God bless. Amen.